There are days out here on the road that feel like any other. Long miles, heavy loads, the hum of tires on asphalt. But then, there are days that change everything. I was rolling down I-95, cutting through the Northeast when the weather turned against us. Fog, ice, and then chaos. In just seconds, the highway became one of the deadliest pileups in UNEEN history. What I saw that morning still haunts me. Steel twisting, flames rising, families trapped inside their cars. And yet, in the middle of it, I had no choice but to act. Not as a truck driver moving freight, but as a man trying to save lives. Stay with me until the end of this story. Because what happened that day isn't just about wreckage on the road. It's about the thin line between death and survival, and how sometimes one decision can change everything.
Chapter 1. Frozen asphalt on the I-95 *. It was just past dawn when I crossed into Connecticut. Running southbound on I-95, the sky was a dull gray blanket, the kind that swallows the sun and makes everything feel colder than it is. My windshield wipers scraped across a thin layer of ice, fighting off a mist that seemed to rise straight from the Atlantic. The radio had been warning about black ice since New Haven, but out here near Hartford, the warnings became real. The asphalt had that glassy sheen, almost invisible, like a trap laid across every lane. I eased off the throttle, feeling my tires skate just slightly before gripping again. Truckers know when a storm isn't just weather, it's a predator waiting to strike. The CB crackled with nervous chatter. Southbound slick, boys, keep it under 50, pile up earlier up by exit 27. Voices with the kind of edge that told you this wasn't just small talk. As I rolled past mile marker 86, I felt that pit in my stomach. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, the fog pressing in so close. It felt like I was driving through smoke. Tail lights ahead appeared and disappeared in a heartbeat. And then, silence. No birds, no wind, just the hum of my rig fighting the road. That kind of silence that tells you something's about to happen. My hands tightened on the wheel, breath clouding the cab, eyes locked ahead. I didn't know it yet, but in less than 2 minutes, the road in front of me would erupt into the sound of metal tearing, glass shattering, and lives hanging in the balance. And I was headed straight for it. Chapter 2. The sound of screeching steel. It started with a sound. Not just any sound, one that every trucker knows too well. The sharp, high-pitched scream of tires losing grip on frozen asphalt. It cut through the fog like a blade, echoing down the I-95 corridor. Up ahead, barely visible through the mist, I saw brake lights flash, one after another, like a red strobe vanishing into smoke. Then came the first impact, two cars colliding, the crunch of steel folding in on itself. A heartbeat later, the chain reaction began. One sedan spun sideways, clipped by a pickup that had no room to stop. Behind them, a box truck plowed into the mess, its rear end fishtailing as if the driver was fighting for his life. The sound was deafening screeches, horns blaring, glass exploding like gunshots. I gripped the wheel of my Freightliner, knuckles white, as the fog cleared just enough to show the nightmare unfolding. A tanker truck jackknifed across 3 lanes, sparks showering as its trailer scraped against the guardrail. A commuter bus, full of early morning passengers, swerved hard to the right and tipped sideways, skidding across the icy shoulder until it slammed against the embankment. The smell hit me next, burnt rubber, antifreeze hissing from ruptured radiators, and that metallic tongue of blood mixing with cold air. The highway, usually a river of motion, had turned into a graveyard of twisted vehicles in seconds. I hit the brakes gently, pumping them to keep control. My tires shuddered against the ice, but I kept the rig steady, eyes darting for any escape route. The left lane was a wall of wreckage. To the right, cars were piled like toys in a child's hand. And then I saw at the narrow strip of shoulder, barely wide enough for me to fit. It wasn't a choice. It was survival. I swung the wheel just enough to angle my truck onto the icy margin, praying the trailer wouldn't drag me into the chaos. For a moment, time slowed. The world outside my cab was a blur of flames and flying debris. I could see faces through windshields, terror frozen in their eyes as their vehicles spun helplessly. When my rig finally came to a stop, my heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the engine. Ahead of me, the pileup stretched farther than I could see, cars stacked, smoke rising, people stumbling out in shock. Behind me, I could hear the unmistakable thud of more vehicles joining the wreck, slamming into the disaster. I sat there, gripping the wheel, breath fogging the glass. This wasn't just a bad wreck. This was one of those once-in-a-lifetime tragedies. And I realized, sitting there on the shoulder, that I had two choices: stay in the safety of my cab or step out into hell itself. Chapter 3. A split-second choice. The cab of my truck felt like the last safe place on earth. Heat humming from the vents, the steering wheel still warm from my grip. Outside, the highway was chaos metal twisted into impossible shapes. Glass scattered like ice across the asphalt, flames licking upward from leaking fuel. I should have stayed put. That's what every survival instinct screamed at me. Lock the doors, call 911, and wait. But when you see a minivan folded in half, smoke pouring from the engine, and hear the muffled screams of a child trapped inside, you don't get to just sit there. Not if you've got a beating heart. I grabbed my high-visibility jacket from the passenger seat and slipped it on, hands trembling. The CB was alive with panic. Pile up near mile marker 86. Multiple trucks down. We need fire. We need EMS. We need everybody. The voices blended together, some of them truckers I knew only by their handles. Brotherhood of the road, now bound by tragedy. I pushed open my door, and the cold hit me like a wall. Sharp, biting air filled with smoke and the acrid sting of burning oil. The fog that had been my enemy minutes ago now swirled with firelight, casting ghostly shadows over the wreck. The shoulder beneath my boots crunched with ice as I moved toward the carnage. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the weight of what I was about to face was pressing down on me. A sedan lay sideways across two lanes, roof crumpled flat. The driver was motionless, slumped over the steering wheel, the windshield spider-webbed with cracks. A pickup had slammed into the rear, its front end smoking, steam rising from the engine. And just beyond, that minivan, its back window shattered, a pair of small hands slapping weakly against the glass, crying muffled by twisted metal. I sprinted. My boots slipped on black ice, nearly sending me sprawling, but I caught myself and lunged toward the van. The door handle was bent and jammed, refusing to budge. Inside, two kids were strapped in their seats, wide-eyed with terror, their mother shouting from the front, trapped by a crushed dashboard. I shouted over the roar of the fire and the endless echo of horns blaring from wrecked vehicles. "Hold on, I'm going to get you out." In that moment, I knew my choice had been made. I wasn't a trucker hauling freight anymore. I was the only thing standing between those kids and the fire creeping closer. It was a split-second decision, and it changed everything. Single quotes, Chapter 4. The highway turns into a battlefield from where I stood. The highway no longer looked like a road. It looked like a war zone. Smoke rose in thick plumes, blending with the fog until the air itself was gray and choking. Headlights flickered through the haze, some still burning, others shattered and dead. The sharp crack of fire meeting cold air echoed like gunfire. I forced myself forward, past the minivan I'd reached moments earlier. The kids inside were sobbing, their tiny fists pounding the glass. Their mother's voice, strained and panicked, pleaded with me to hurry. I pulled at the door again, this time with both hands. My boots braced against the icy pavement. Metal groaned but wouldn't give. My breath came out ragged clouds as I fought with it. From behind me came another impact, another vehicle, slamming into the growing wreck. The ground seemed to shake under my feet. A semi had jackknifed into the barrier. Its trailer sprawled across two lanes like a fallen giant. The driver staggered out, blood streaking his forehead, his expression dazed. He looked around at the chaos as if he couldn't believe he was still alive. Voices carried through the wreckage. Cries, shouts, the desperate wails of people trapped in their cars. A woman screamed for her husband. Somewhere deeper in the pileup, a man shouted for someone to help him pry open a door. Every sound was swallowed by the chorus of chaos. The hiss of steam, the whoosh of fire, the screech of twisted steel settling into place. I tore off my gloves for better grip, ignoring the bite of cold against my skin, and jammed my fingers under the bent doorframe of the minivan. 1, 2, 3 heave. The door screeched, moved an inch, then another. I felt it shift just enough to wedge my shoulder into the gap. With everything I had, I pried it open. The door finally gave, swinging wide. The mother sobbed as I reached in and unbuckled her daughter first, pulling her out into the cold morning air. The child clung to my neck, trembling. I handed her off to the injured trucker, who'd shaken off his shock long enough to help. Then I went back for the boy, lifting him out, his small arms locked tight around my jacket. The mother was still trapped, her legs pinned by the dashboard. She gritted her teeth through the pain, telling me to get her kids away first. That kind of selflessness guts you. I promised I'd come back. I had to. Stepping away from the van, I took in the full scope of it. The pileup stretched farther than I could see, a line of destruction fading into fog. Vehicles stacked 3 high in places, some burning, some silent, others alive with pounding fists and desperate cries for help. The highway had turned into a battlefield, and there was no cavalry here yet. Just us, the survivors, and whoever had the strength to keep fighting. And for reasons I still can't explain, in that moment, I knew I was going to spend every last ounce of energy I had trying to keep strangers alive. Chapter 5. First Steps into Chaos Asterisk. The first rule they drill into us as truckers is that you never stop on a live highway unless you absolutely have to. That rule was gone now. This wasn't a highway anymore. It was a disaster site. I pulled the handheld mic from my CB and keyed up. My voice shook, but I forced it steady. Breaker, this is southbound near mile marker 86. I-95, just outside Hartford. We got a major pileup. At least 50 vehicles down. I need everyone northbound to slow it down. Emergency services. We need fire, EMS, state troopers, everyone you got. The channel erupted with voices. Some truckers behind me saying they'd stop and try to help. Others warning drivers still a mile out to get off at the last exit. For a second, I felt the weight of what I'd just done. I wasn't just another guy on the road anymore. I'd made myself part of this. I clipped the CB back to the dash, grabbed a crowbar from the side compartment, and started back toward the wreckage. My boots slipped again and again on the ice, but I kept my balance. The cold gnawed through my jacket, but sweat was already dripping down my back from adrenaline. The cries guided me. A man's voice first, hoarse and desperate, calling for help. I found him slumped halfway out of a sedan that had been rear-ended so hard the trunk was nearly touching the back seats. His door had been crushed shut, but his window was down. He was pinned at the hip, bleeding from a cut above his eye. "I'm stuck," he rasped. "Please, my wife. She's on the other side." I crouched, peered through the shattered glass at the passenger seat. She was there still breathing, but unconscious. Her head rested against the side window, blood staining the fabric of her winter coat. I jammed the crowbar against the frame, braced my weight, and pulled. The metal groaned, shifted an inch, then slammed back. Not enough. I tried again, legs straining, shoulders shaking. It moved a little farther. The man inside grunted in pain as the car twisted with the pressure. Finally, the door gave way enough to wedge open. I reached across him and felt for a pulse on the woman. Weak, but there. I unbuckled her, pulled her across his lap, and with one hard heave managed to drag her out onto the icy ground. He sobbed with relief. "Thank you. God, thank you." I leaned in again. "I'll get you out too. Just hold on." But as I worked, the sounds around me sharpened. Shouting, flames cracking, glass popping. Every second counted. Somewhere close, another vehicle caught fire, the smoke rising black against the pale fog. The wind shifted, carrying the acrid fumes straight into my lungs. I coughed, eyes stinging, but I stayed with him. With one more wrench of the crowbar, his leg came free. He screamed, then gasped, but I pulled him out. We half stumbled, half fell away from the wreck, dragging his wife with us, until we were clear of the leaking fuel. I set them down against the guardrail, told him to keep pressure on her wound, then ran back in. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one moving toward the wreck instead of away from it. 2 other truckers had left their cab's big guys in Carhartt jacket, one carrying a fire extinguisher, the other holding a pry bar. We exchanged a look, no words needed. Strangers a minute ago, now brothers in arms. Together, we sprinted into the chaos, ready to pull whoever we could from the grip of fire and twisted steel. Chapter 6, Lives Hanging by a Thread. There's a moment in disasters like this when the shock wears off and reality hits. You stop thinking about yourself, you start counting lives. That was me as I pushed deeper into the wreckage. The first semi I came to was tipped on its side. Its trailer sprawled across both lanes. The driver was still inside the cab, banging on the glass, smoke curling from under the hood. I climbed up the twisted metal like a ladder, crowbar wedged under my arm, and smashed at the side window until it gave. "Grab my hand," I shouted. He reached, coughing, his face blackened from smoke. I pulled with everything I had, muscles screaming, until he collapsed against me on the side of the cab. He was heavy, but adrenaline made me stronger than I ever knew I could be. We scrambled down together, landing hard on the pavement. Behind us, the flames from another car caught, spreading across leaking gasoline. A fire whooshed to life, a wall of heat so intense it made my skin feel like it was peeling. We had seconds before that semi went up. I pushed him toward the shoulder, yelled for him to run, and turned back again. Everywhere I looked, there were people, some trapped, some wandering in shock, some frozen in place, screaming. A young guy stumbled past me, his face streaked with blood, holding his arm at a sickening angle. He looked no older than 20. He muttered, "My buddy's still in the car," before collapsing against the guardrail. I wanted to stop, to help him, but his words lit a fire in me. I ran in the direction he came from. The car was upside down, wheels spinning slow, like a clock ticking down. Inside, his friend hung limp from the seatbelt. I crawled on my stomach through shattered glass to reach him. The belt was locked tight. My fingers shook as I dug into my pocket for my pocket knife. With one slice, the belt snapped. He fell against me, dead weight. I dragged him inch by inch, glass slicing my palms, smoke stinging my throat. Just as I pulled him clear, the car's engine block burst into flame. The sound was like a cannon shot, the heat rolling over me in a wave that nearly knocked me flat. I coughed, pulled him farther away, and looked down. He was breathing shallow, weak but alive. That was when I realized my crowbar was gone, probably lost in the crawl. I looked around for another tool, anything I could use. That's when I saw another trucker, one of the guys from earlier, using his extinguisher to keep flames back while the other pried open doors with brute strength. We locked eyes again. No words, just a nod. We weren't rescuers by training. We weren't heroes. We were truckers, strangers, caught in a nightmare, doing the only thing men with strong backs and stubborn wills could do, fight for every life we could reach. And all around us, lives were hanging by a thread. Chapter 7, The Storm Above. The fire below asterisk. The sky chose the worst possible moment to unleash itself. Snow that had been falling lightly all morning suddenly thickened into heavy flakes, whipped sideways by an icy wind. Within minutes, the wreckage was blanketed in white, covering twisted steel and shattered glass, masking the blood on the asphalt. It almost looked peaceful, until the fire reminded us it was anything but. The flames that had started in a handful of cars were now spreading faster than the snow could cover. Gasoline leaked across the road in jagged black rivers, igniting wherever sparks touched. The fire hissed and crackled, eating through tires, swallowing interiors. Each explosion, each burst of flame, echoed against the fog like thunder. I crouched low beside a man whose leg was nearly severed, pressing down on the wound with my jacket to stop the bleeding. He clutched my arm, his teeth chattering so violently I thought they'd break. "Don't let me die here," he whispered. I didn't answer. What could I say? I focused on the rhythm, press down, hold, don't let go. My knees were numb against the frozen asphalt, my hands shaking not just from the cold, but from the fear of failing him. Overhead, the faint thump of helicopter blades cut through the storm. I craned my neck and saw the shape of a state police chopper circling, searchlight cutting swaths through the fog. The beam landed on the wreck for only seconds, but in that brief light, I saw the scale. Dozens of vehicles crumpled together, stretching beyond sight, like a graveyard that had appeared out of nowhere. The driver beside me groaned, pulling me back to the moment. I ripped a strip of cloth from his torn jeans and tied it tight above the wound, a makeshift tourniquet. He screamed, but the bleeding slowed. It wasn't much, but it was something. That's when I heard the horn. Not the blare of a stuck car horn, but a deep, bellowing blast, the kind only a semi makes. I looked up. Another truck, unable to stop, was sliding straight toward the wreck from the northbound lane. The driver had lost control, his trailer swinging like a pendulum. I jumped up, waving my arms, screaming through the snow. Useless. He couldn't see me. His rig plowed sideways into the edge of the pileup, metal shrieking, sparks flying. The shockwave of the impact knocked me onto the ground. I scrambled back, ears ringing, as more screams joined the chorus. The man I just tried to save was silent now. I pressed my fingers to his neck, but the faint pulse was gone. I sat there for one hollow second, snow settling on his open eyes, and I forced myself up, my body screaming in protest. This wasn't a scene for the faint-hearted anymore. This was survival. And above us, the storm raged on, while below us, the fire grew hotter, hungrier, swallowing everything in its path. Every second mattered. And every second, the line between life and death grew thinner. Chapter 8, A Brotherhood on the Road *. By the time I reached the far side of the wreck, I wasn't alone anymore. The two truckers who had joined earlier were still fighting, faces blackened with soot, eyes red from smoke, arms bleeding from cuts. And there were more now. A delivery van driver, a young guy in a UPS jacket, even a civilian who'd pulled over and thrown himself into the chaos without hesitation. It was as if the highway had summoned its own army ordinary men, with no uniforms, no badges, just raw willpower and stubborn hearts. We moved like a unit. One of the truckers, a giant of a man with a voice like gravel, barked orders. "You keep that fire back with the extinguisher. You check those cars for trapped passengers. Move, move, move." No hesitation. We obeyed. I found myself at the crumpled remains of a family SUV, its roof caved in. Inside, a father was braced against the steering wheel, his teenage daughter in the back seat, screaming that her brother wouldn't wake up. My stomach turned cold. I forced the door with my shoulder, tearing muscles I didn't even know I had. It finally gave, and I slid into the cramped space. The boy was slumped against the seatbelt, pale as snow. I pressed 2 fingers to his neck, a pulse faint, but there. "Stay with me, buddy," I muttered. "Don't you dare give up now." I cut the belt with the pocket knife I still had and lifted him out, careful not to jostle his head. The girl followed, tears freezing on her cheeks. Their father was still pinned, but he shouted at me to take his kids first. The kind of selflessness I'd seen again and again that morning. Outside, the UPS driver met me halfway. He took the boy in his arms, like he was his own son, sprinting toward the shoulder where survivors huddled against the guardrail. I turned back for the father, but the heat from the fire creeping closer stopped me. The metal was glowing, seconds from igniting. I tried anyway, but the flames forced me back. His eyes locked on mine in that final moment. He knew. He nodded once, as if to say, "Get out. Save who you can." I stumbled back, throat burning, eyes streaming. I hated myself for leaving him, but the truth was, if I'd stayed, none of us would have made it out. And that's when I felt a heavy hand clap my shoulder. The big trucker, soot streaked across his face, handed me a crowbar. "We ain't done yet," he growled. We pressed on. Together, we pulled 3 more people from crushed sedans. one woman from under a collapsed trailer, and even a small dog trapped in a cage in the back of a pickup. Every life we pulled free was a small victory against the mountain of loss that surrounded us. The brotherhood was real. Out there, in the snow and fire, titles didn't matter. We weren't strangers. We were brothers of the road, bonded by diesel and iron, standing shoulder to shoulder against the storm. And though none of us said it out loud, we all knew one truth. Without each other, this highway would have become a graveyard many times over. Chapter 9, The Long Wait for Sirens Asterisk. The minutes stretched into hours. Or maybe it just felt that way. Time didn't move right out there. Every breath was smoke, every heartbeat another reminder that I wasn't sure how long any of us had left. I kept scanning the fog, straining my ears for that one sound we all prayed for, the rising wail of sirens. But all I heard was the battlefield around me. Fire still crackled, flames licking higher as snowflakes melted the second they touched. Engines hissed, horns blared endlessly where lifeless bodies had fallen against them. The cries of the wounded were everywhere, some faint, some sharp enough to cut through the storm. I found myself back at the guardrail, kneeling beside the kids I'd pulled from the minivan earlier. They clung to each other, their mother still pinned in the wreck. I'd promised her I'd come back, but when I tried, the flames had grown too hot. The dashboard fused around her legs like a coffin of steel. She'd screamed at me to leave, to get her children safe. And now, watching those kids sob into each other's shoulders, I knew I'd kept only half my promise. Beside them, the boy from the overturned car was still unconscious, his chest barely rising. I pressed my hand against his forehead, whispering to him like he could hear me. "You hang in there, buddy. You're not going anywhere. Not today." Other survivors sat huddled together in the snow face's ghostly pale, hands shaking, clothes torn and bloodied. Some cried silently. Others stared blankly, as if their minds had already left the scene. The makeshift group of rescuers, those of us who'd chosen to fight, kept moving among them, trying to give warmth, comfort, anything we could offer until help arrived. Then finally it came, faint at first, almost a trick of the wind, a high, distant cry. Sirens. I stood up, craning my neck, listening. They grew louder, closer, until the fog split open with flashing red and blue. First the state police cruisers, lights scattering against the ice. Then ambulances, their back doors already swinging wide, paramedics rushing out with stretchers. Fire trucks arrived last, hoses uncoiling, men shouting orders as water arched through the smoky air. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. But it wasn't over. Not yet. We had to guide them in, tell them who was still alive, where the worst was. I stumbled back toward the fire, pointing, yelling, waving my arms. "There's a family trapped in the van. This way. 2 unconscious by the guardrail. Over here, hurry." My voice cracked, throat raw from smoke, but I kept shouting until I knew they heard me. The battlefield was no longer just ours. The cavalry had finally arrived, but the weight of the waiting, the endless stretch between hope and despair, was something I'd never forget. Because in that silence before the sirens, you realize how fragile life really is, and how easily it can slip away. Single quotes Chapter 10, the silent drive home hours later, when the last flames had been beaten back and the final survivors carried off on stretchers. The highway looked unrecognizable. The snow had turned black with ash, the asphalt a graveyard of mangled steel and shattered glass. Emergency lights still flashed against the fog, but the chaos had quieted into something else, something heavier. I stood there with the other truckers who had fought beside me, faces smeared with soot and streaked with tears none of us admitted to. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. We'd shared something only those who had stood on that battlefield could understand. I watched as the little girl I'd carried out earlier was lifted into an ambulance, her small hand clinging to her brother's. Their mother never made it out. I don't think I'll ever stop hearing her voice, begging me to save her kids. And I don't think I'll ever stop questioning if I could have done more. The young man I dragged from the upside-down car survived the night, though barely. I learned later his friend, the one who had stumbled toward me, didn't. Life had balanced its scales in a way that felt cruel. One by one, The ambulances pulled away, their sirens fading into the snowy distance. The battlefield emptied, leaving behind only wreckage and silence. My breath came heavy in the cold, each exhale a cloud that disappeared too quickly, like the lives that had slipped from our hands. When it was finally over, I climbed back into my rig. My cab smelled of smoke now, my jacket soaked in blood that wasn't mine. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the cracked windshield, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't turn the key right away. I just sat there, letting the weight of the day crush down on me. I thought about how close I'd come to being part of that wreck, how one split-second decision to swerve onto the shoulder had spared me. I thought about the faces I'd never forget, the mother who gave her life for her children, the truckers who fought beside me, the strangers whose lives ended on that frozen stretch of I-95. And when I finally turned the key, the engine roared to life like nothing had happened, like it was just another day on the road. But it wasn't, not for me. As I rolled slowly past the flashing lights, past the bent guardrails and burned out shells of vehicles, I whispered to myself the only truth I knew. Today, trucking wasn't about freight, it was about lives. The miles stretched ahead, silent and endless. And though I drove on, part of me never left that battlefield at mile marker 86. Because some loads you carry forever.
If you've made it with me this far, I want to thank you for walking through this story with me. Out here on the highways of America, truckers see more than just asphalt and mile markers. We see life at its most fragile, and sometimes at its most heroic. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Mile Marker 31. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the strength we can find in each other. There are more stories ahead, some dark, some haunting, some full of hope. And I'll be here to share them with you. Until then, keep your eyes on the road and take care of each other out there.